wants to fight some billionaires? Anybody? I assume some people here want to fight Donald Trump. But who wants to fix a broken Democratic Party? Anybody? That's what we're here to talk about today, and we're thrilled to have some amazing people to talk with us about it, including one of our favorites, Attorney General from Minnesota, Keith Ellison, former FTC Commissioner Alvaro Bedoya, a community leader in New York, Juanita Lewis, Executive Director of Community Voices Heard, and Executive Director of Data for Progress, Ryan O'Donnell. And at its core, this panel will be about storytelling. I'm Adam Green, co-founder of the Progressive Change Institute and Progressive Change Campaign Committee. And I'm going to be sharing a little bit about the impetus for this panel, the story of some lessons learned from 2024. And I actually spent an inordinate amount of my focus last year engaging the White House with our friends at Data for Progress, showing them economic polling that was done week after week after week in our partnership. And we were showing them things that they already believed in and trying to make sure they understood which of their own proposals were most popular and how to talk about them. And I spent an agonizing evening in the United Kingdom up at 2 o'clock in the morning watching President Biden's last State of the Union. It also might have been his last good speech. But the question was, would he actually integrate the language that advocates were putting on their radar as smart, popular, economic populist messaging? And was elated when he used verbatim the top recommendation that Progressive Change Institute and Data for Progress had been beckoning the White House to use, which was basically that Republicans want to cut Social Security in order to fund tax cuts for millionaires. That, of all the things that were popular, those were the two most popular issues, and merged together as one, they were a force multiplier for each other. So it was amazing that they used it, and he continued to use it in speech after the State of the Union. And then fast forward to the Kamala campaign, after there were many more months of polling, there were 3 top recommendations we handed to them in a memo. And we were elated when they used all 3 in speech after speech. One was taking on corporate price gouging of groceries. Another was taxing billionaires. A third was protecting Social Security. And we're further elated when their pollsters replicated our findings, and there was no joke, $1 billion of ad spending on these 3 messages between the Harris campaign and their super PAC, before worrying about any Senate or House campaigns that also kind of followed suit. And about 2 weeks before the election, ourselves and Data for Progress held an off-the-record briefing for reporters about this year and a half of messaging advice and activism organizing. And Dave Weigel from Semaphore, who's actually at Netroots this weekend, asked a really important question. He said, okay, so you got them to use your messaging. What happens if she loses? And that hit on something I had been thinking about, and I shared off the record at the time, this kind of gnawing feeling I had, this kind of pit in my throat, my stomach, and it was like, I want to believe that $1 billion of spending on popular messaging will win the election. But if we lose, I worry it's because people don't believe she actually means it. And case in point was the debate, which I believe she won. And she won it through a series of excellent answers on abortion and some fine answers on democracy. But not one punch was thrown on economics, which poll after poll showed was the #1 issue for voters. And what that said to me was it wasn't in her gut. Towards the end of the campaign, myself and my colleague Hannah Riddle, who's here, spent some time on the ground with Dan Osborne in Nebraska. Anybody remember him? He was the independent mechanic union leader running in a 20-point red state and was neck and neck in the polls with an incumbent Republican senator. And what we observed was on any question that this union leader was asked, whether it was about economics or immigration or climate, he instinctively would make it a story about workers versus CEOs and corporations. And it wasn't that he was media trained, it was just in his gut. He dripped and oozed authenticity on working people's issues. And at the end of the day, he outperformed Kamala Harris by 14 points in Nebraska. Better than John Tester did in his state, better than Sherrod Brown did in his state, better than any Democrat on the ballot running for Senate. And unfortunately, it was a 20-point red state, so he still lost. He's running again this year. Yes. But this story of 2024 cemented, for me, and really instructed in the DNA of this panel, 3 important lessons. One is, those who succeed most in politics will be from the gut, not from the teleprompter on working people's issues. Second, we need to be willing to pick fights and name villains in our storytelling. Beware of political leaders who, quote unquote, fight for everybody. It is impossible to fight for everybody. There are bad actors and good actors, and voters want to see us call them out. And third, and this is kind of a new one for me, the modern axis that the public is looking at when deciding who to vote for is actually not left versus right. It's not Democrat, Republican, it's not progressive, conservative. It is inside versus outside. The reason that so many people supported Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, or as AOC observed at the election, people in her district voted for her and Donald Trump, is not that there's a weird Venn diagram of Medicare for all voters who hate immigrants, right? it's that people want someone who will shake up the system, who will channel their visceral rage toward the system. And on this panel today, we have people who have stories of picking fights, of winning fights, of losing some fights, of having successes, having some lessons learned, and we want to hear these stories and hope that our reservoir, our story bank, is full as we leave this room in about an hour. So before we turn things over to Keith Ellison, in an abundance of caution, in case anyone believes it's too obvious, these lessons, of course we should pick fights, of course we should have villains, of course we should do compelling storytelling. I'm going to show you a 20-second clip from a recent political event that got a lot of news coverage in Washington, D.C., sponsored by a group called Welcome Pack. It was called Welcome Fest. And I just want you to reflect on what Derek Thompson, one of the co-authors of Abundance, had to say on this panel.
If you and I, Marshall, if we were having like a debate on this stage, if you and I were like running in a primary, and you said that, you said, the far right has a story and they've won. The far left has a story. The center doesn't have a story, and that's a problem. What I would say in response to that is, yeah, stories are for children. Americans need a plan.
That is political advice being given in Washington, D.C. by some people. So with that in mind, you've heard the story of Keith Ellison for about 20 years now, if not longer.
You know, man.
20 years young. So let's turn it over. Keith, talk to us about your values, the fights that you've picked, some stories that should be on all of our radar.
So in 2015, I was a member of Congress working with my man Adam all the time, and I was at home in my district, and a lady walks up to me. She looks me dead in the eye as I'm pulling on my glove and my coat and my hat. It was in the middle of winter in Minnesota, and she said, "I got to talk to you." So she gestured me toward the wall because there were not that many people there, and she said, "My son Alex Smith, he died when he was in the first few days of being 26 years old because he aged off of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act." And this woman, whose name is Nicole Holt Smith, mid-40s, woman, she said, "My boy learned that he was a type 1 diabetic, and he went from being on my insurance to being on his own, and so he was facing $1,300 a month bills. And I want to know, Congressman, what you're going to do about it." Well, one thing we did is we worked on an antitrust caucus. Another thing we did is we looked at legislation. But I decided I was running for Attorney General because I needed to sue these people, because there is an insulin cartel in our country that is directly responsible for the death of Alex Smith. Now, that's a story, friends. That is a story. That is corporate greed. You should know that in 1929, researchers at University of Toronto sold the patent for insulin for $1. And they wanted this drug to be available to everyone. Before insulin, Type 1 diabetes meant you were going to die. Done. Now it's a chronic illness. The story is corporate consolidation, corporate greed, monopolizing the market, setting up a cartel. I leave the Congress, get into AG's office, and we sue Novo Nordisk, Sanofi, and Eli Lilly, and we beat them to the point where they have to agree to no more than $35 insulin for anybody in the state of Minnesota. So the story is, yes, corporate greed is screwing just about everybody. And it comes in multiple shades and sizes. This is not a criticism of small business. In fact, small business is one of the #1 victims of corporate greed and big business. We, as a progressive movement, should build a coalition with our small business community. But we also have to strengthen our unions. We also have to do relentless antitrust. And here's a story. Imagine 2020 inauguration. You see Trump up there. Who's standing behind him? Is it auto workers? Is it construction workers? Is it people who make sure that we live in a sanitary, clean environment? Or is it Musk, Bezos, and Zuckerberg, top 5 richest people in the world? The story has got to be that clearly since 1980, Reagan wins, massive tax cut in 1981, fires Patco, immediately attacking the labor movement, and starts trying to divide Americans along the lines of race and gender and you name it. If there's a fissure point between any group of Americans, they're agitating at it to make us see each other as the villain, not them. That's the story. That's what's actually happening. The virtue of this story is that it's true. And so I'll stop right there, but it is encoded in human thinking that we understand the world through story. You cannot collect a group of facts disjointed. They congeal in your mind because it's about narrative. That's how we tell a story. That's why we have song. What is song about? Song is about story. And we do it in a catchy way so that you remember it. And so story is critical. What that guy said is wrong. If you're thinking about running for office, absolutely ignore him as aggressively as you can. But think about a story that is compelling, that anyone can understand, because you get why I'm very pissed off about Alex Smith, right? You get why I would leave Congress to fight for Alex Smith, right? Because the story happens to be a true story.
Round of applause for this man.
Yeah.
Thrilled that we have Alvaro Bedoya here, who was in the trenches with Lena Khan on the FTC, taking on big monopolies. I want to give a shout out to our friends at the American Economic Liberties Council project who work on that exact issue. And I actually would love to introduce you with one story. Last year I was at a reception for frontline Democratic candidates for Congress. I was talking to one of them about the polling and taxing billionaires. And a woman named Marie Glusenkamp Perez overheard us and walks over. She wins consistently a Trump district in rural Washington state. And she interjects herself and she goes, "Tax the rich to balance the budget. That's the new Blue Dogs." And I was like, what? Right? And I start talking to her and she goes, "Anti-monopoly, that's the future." And I was like, what is going on here? So can you tell us the story of why is anti-monopoly so popular, including in Trump districts?
Well, we don't have all day, but I will. I was going to tell you a slightly different story, if it's okay, that I think gets to that. So, as Adam said, I spent the last 3 years at the FTC with Lena Khan, suing those oligarchs with folks like the Attorney General here. We sued Amazon for ripping off small business sellers, 50 cents on every dollar they were taking away. We sued Zuckerberg for screwing people over on privacy settings, especially kids. and monetizing their attention, their eyeballs on these sites. We blocked the Kroger-Albertsons merger. We're suing corporate landlords. But I think I'm here because last March, as I was standing in my daughter's gymnastics class, I got an email purporting to fire me from the White House. And so I think what I can share is some of the lessons we've learned based on how we tried to handle that situation, right? So we knew there was a good chance the president was going to try to illegally fire me and my colleague, Commissioner Slaughter. And so right at the outset, we said, look, we're going to be loud. We're going to have statements ready to go. We're going to flood the zone. We're also not going to go along with it, right? When we got that email saying we're fired, we said, we're not fired. We're going to issue statements that say Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter, Commissioner Alvaro Bedoya. We kept on issuing statements on the bananas decisions they made to take an oil executive who was colluding with OPEC and put him on the board, or let him be back on the board of Exxon. And we would issue these things as if we were still in office. I traveled to Iowa to meet with farmers. So we didn't play the game, right? We met their chaos with chaos. But I think one of the more effective things we did was just poke these guys in the eye on social media. And it sounds crazy because so many of us have spent years of our lives trying to not be on social media. But nowadays, this is where policy lives, and it's really important for these Trump guys to have this really manly social media presence online. And so one of the first things that I did with Bezos, you all remember when Bezos, came out and was like, from now on, the Post editorial page will be about free markets and free speech, right? And he was getting all this attention for this very principled stance that Jeff Bezos was taking on the Post editorial page. And so I watched Jeff Bezos very closely because we like to sue him. And I noticed that on Reddit, there was an Amazon worker who went online, took a picture of this vending machine, and the headline was in the Reddit post, "I'm all out of my allotment this week and I'm screaming." And if you read the post, you see that there are so many injuries on Amazon warehouse floors that they literally have to allot them to their workers. And instead of a vending machine dispensing potato chips and Coke, they have vending machines dispensing painkillers on the floor of Amazon warehouses.
There's a story for you.
And so I just screen grabbed that. I replied to his tweet. And this is as a sitting commissioner, right? And I said, Mr. Bezos, I'm sorry, when I think about free markets and I don't think about the Post editorial page, I think about this vending machine that dispenses painkillers. And there was this huge response to that, and it says, okay, wow, okay, that's a thing that I can do as a commissioner. And so this other thing happened. This is my last story, and then I'll shut up. Where, we're supposed to be in this golden age of labor and small business, right? Sure feels like that, right? And the new chairman of the FTC had these super North Korea statements, when he got in, we're going to usher in this golden age of labor and small business, just copy-pasting the stuff Trump was saying. And yet when he got in, there was this executive order saying we have to control costs. But what did he do? He banned DEI, right? And then he tweeted about it, and he tweeted about it again, and then he started talking about trans people. And so he's doing nothing about what people were actually hurting about, nothing about the cost of groceries, the cost of gas, the cost of healthcare, the cost of eggs.
Right.
And so we kept on trying to steer him to it. So finally, I got pissed off, and I went to the grocery store, and there was an empty shelf of eggs. I took a photo of that. I tagged him in the shelf of eggs, and I said, "Dear everyone who went to the grocery store and saw this, would you believe there is one guy in government who could flick his pen and get to the bottom as to what the hell is happening? His name is Andrew Ferguson. He's the new chairman of the FTC. Has he done it? No." And so that got some views. But then he replied. He replied in this 6-post chain that was "Rah, you don't know what you're talking about, and you're over on Blue Sky, and what's the matter with you, and you're wrong, and blah, 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 blah." And so one FTC commissioner in the minority yelling at the chairman, that's not news. That's just the commissioner, minority commissioner being a minority commissioner. The chairman on a Sunday night, right, replying with this 3,000-word essay about how I was super duper wrong and I'm an idiot, that's news. And so a couple days later, the New York Times covered it, and a couple days later after that, the Department of Justice announced an investigation into the price of eggs, right? Now, I'm not saying that was it, but it didn't hurt, right? And so these are some of the lessons we've learned about how to poke these guys and make them do their jobs, right? That I can share. I'm happy to talk about the lawsuits, but I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful. Round of applause for this heroism.
More posting, but thank you.
So one reason I'm really thrilled that Juanita is on the panel is that these stories have to resonate in the community. And she's been organizing on the ground in New York for 16 and a half years. Has anybody here heard of Zoran Mamdani? Anybody? Would really love to hear her stories of what is actually working on the ground and inspiring people.
Thanks. So, I mean, there's a lot happening in New York State right now, and especially in New York City. And the organization that I run is called Community Voices Heard, and a lot of our members are those that live in public housing and that are renters. And, folks don't want to hear about those who are living in public housing. And when we're knocking on doors and we're talking to people about what do they care about, they're not always talking about the conditions, right? They're talking about, I want a safe place for my kid to actually be able to play. I'm thinking about childcare, right? I'm thinking about what are opportunities for jobs and education look like for my kids, but no one's actually talking to me about what I care about. Right. And then they're not connecting it to why I should vote for somebody. And so when we go out and we're door knocking, we're making those connections because we're actually talking and listening to what people are saying. And I think that's one of the reasons why Zoran just did an amazing job in this primary, right? Because he wasn't just talking about the normal things, the same old, same old. He was talking about freezing the rent. Y'all know how much New York rent is, right? There's a whole reason why they said the rent is too damn high. It's real. And so when you're going in and talking about freezing the rent, people are listening. When you're talking about being able to have, city-run grocery stores when groceries are astronomically expensive, people are listening. They're not asking, wait, is this realistic? Can this happen? Can you actually do this? They're actually thinking, wow, someone is paying attention to the fact that eggs are expensive, fruit is expensive, and someone actually wants to do something about it. And so now here is an elected, or someone who's running for office that is hearing my story, that's connecting it, and is going to be in a position, hopefully, to actually make some real policy changes that now actually give me some hope and want to believe and actually want to vote and talk to other people about voting. And so we need more of those relationships. We need more of those opportunities to be able to talk to people about things that they care about and in ways that they can understand, and not shame them if they don't necessarily understand the words the way that we say it. Because organizing is about moving people along the spectrum and meeting them where they're at and really hearing about the things that they care about. So these are messages, I think, these are ways of really understanding how community moves and how we're getting them out.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I have so many questions for you. We're going to hear from Ryan O'Donnell, who's Executive Director of Data for Progress, a new Executive Director. And Ryan, the reason I wanted you to kind of play cleanup hitter is because you've heard all these stories. I'm really curious to see, given all the data that you've seen, the stories that you've seen publicly and privately told, what do you make of all this? What are Democrats getting wrong with the storytelling and the identification of villains? What do you see popping in the data? Share with us.
Yeah, I'm the numbers guy. And it's so funny to listen to that welcome pack speech, just because it's so clear, anecdotally and by all kinds of different data that storytelling is what's effective. Like I'm the one up here. I do this for a living, and I need to have my laptop next to me because numbers are easy to forget. And you need to, and when you're telling a story, that's actually what sticks in your head, and that's actually what you can reference back to. It changes voters' behavior, and it makes policy personal, and it allows you to make the change that you're trying to make. So I think I saw a study on this once too that said that I think statistics dropped out of people's brains. About 75% of the numbers dropped out of people's brains after a day. From the numbers, and stories was only like 30% or something like that. And that was true in the polling that Adam talked about before too. It's like just when you do something very simply, like when we were testing the approval of Doge, and we ran polling where one just said, Doge will cut your Social Security and Medicare, et cetera. And then we said, well, Doge will steal from you, and they'll cut all these essential services to cut taxes for billionaires. Independent, unfavorable ratings from independents went up 14 points in a split sample like that. Like, it's just what sticks in people's heads, and it's incredibly important. And I want to go back to something that was talked about earlier too, which is that, like, one of the most important things about storytelling in this environment is that we live in an attention economy, and it's incredibly difficult to get news. When you talk about some things that Democrats have done wrong recently, it's that, we can't keep campaigning like it's 2006. People get their news in different spots now. We did a poll where we kind of bulked together a lot of respondents right after the election, and we asked who people voted for based on their news consumption, right? And the people that paid a great deal of attention to news voted for Kamala Harris by 6 points. People that paid no attention to news at all, Donald Trump won by 19 points. So Democrats are just not getting in front of people, and they're not being heard where they want to be heard. Another interesting fact that we found when we were doing this research too is that almost half of voters said that they frequently get their news from places that aren't giving news. Like that's not their number one priority. Like they're getting their news from places that are talking about sports and comedy and entertainment. That's half of voters said that that's frequently where they're getting it from. So if you have stories that will actually break through and that people will actually listen to, talk about Zohran Mamdani, right? Then you can get in front of them, and that you actually have what you need to win.
Thank you, Ryan. Round of applause for the data that they're providing for our movement. Go for it.
Yeah, I just want to add two things on here, and I'm curious to know what panelists and all of you think. One is absolutely story is the way to go, but the other thing is presence is important. It's important to show up. I don't have any numbers to back it up, but I'd be curious to know what they are. When you show up, when you're present in people's lives, that's something that sticks in people's mind as well. So for us, it's not just the content, it's not just talking about affordability, economy, it's also the method. It's showing up, having the ethic of presence in the lives of people. And that, I think, is a powerful way to communicate story as well, because when you're present, that's actually part of the story. You cared enough to be there, right? And that is part of the story. So often, when I was in Congress, I used to hear people say, well, what's the message, the message? And they act as if there's some magical set of words arranged in a particular order that would have an abracadabra effect on the electorate. It's not true. What matters, you talk about what people care about, you listen to people, you talk directly to people, and that is labor intensive. That is labor intensive. And we can beat the other side in terms of just raw numbers of people delivering a message. I can't talk to the 5.6 million Minnesotans, but if I can talk to enough people who can then help carry that message to every square foot of the state, that makes a very big difference. And so I would say story, presence, energy on the ground is what is just as important as the content of what we're saying, which is also critically important. Last point, how do you develop that content? By talking to people. If you are at community meetings and on the doors and present, people will tell you what's important to them. You don't have to guess, you don't need a focus group. You just have to repeat the stories of what people are telling you. Like the story about how evil and wrong and bad the Dobbs decision was. Like the story about why we sued Trump over trying to exclude trans athletes from participation. There's stories around that, and these stories told by real people are persuasive and will get you successful if you, no matter what you're trying to do.
And can I pivot from that thought to Juanita, because when you described, presence and energy, I was thinking of Zoran the whole time. And, I was on a UK panel maybe about a month ago, and I was really struck at numerous people saying something to the effect of, these are labor people saying, I have no idea what my Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, stands for, but I can tell you all three things that Zoran Mamdani stand for. And this is like thousands of miles away. And I'm so curious to hear from you, what were the light bulb moments for local people?
Yeah, so just to piggyback off something that the Attorney General said, there's the importance of presence and definitely the importance of being a part of an organization that is also part of listening in community and bringing out those stories and being the trusted messengers. And so, a part of some of the things that were happening with Zoran's race is that there were organizations that were also supporting him, right? And so a couple of the ones that we work with were with him from day one, and they were working with him on his messaging, right, around freezing the rent, around grocery stores, around a lot of the issues that he was talking about. And they were testing it and talking to their members about it. And so actually I want to change that, not testing it, they were talking to members because that's what members were saying that they were feeling. That's what they said they wanted. And so they were having the conversations continuously. They were asking what they would want to see happen, what they'd want to see change. They were refining the message based on the experiences that they were having, and that's what was resonating. And then having a person that was running that jived with that was like, yes, I want to do that because it's something I believe in. And there's a group of people whose lives will be changed if this were to happen. And there's a whole organization and organizations that are ready to throw down because of this, right? And so those stories are out there, and they're in organizations, and there are millions of people out there just waiting their doors to be knocked on, texted, whatever, to be invited in to share their story, to be able to move into some type of action so we can start calling out some of these bad actors.
And just to go one step further, it seems very intentional that he tied billionaires into his messaging,
Yes.
right? It wasn't just generic affordability. There were people doing things to you, right?
Yes.
His talk about grocery stores directly, Kroger, Albertsons, it wasn't just that, we need a grocery store. It's that there's corporate price gouging, there's monopolies, right? Can you say a little bit about how did that resonate with regular people when they heard that story compared to a more bland, I'll give you good things as opposed to these bad actors are taking things from you, I'll help you?
It was a light bulb moment because there's now a name to this thing that is stopping me from having a better life. It's not just this person that's got way more money is saying that you can't have these things. No, this is the name, this is the corporation, and this is how we can actually go after them. It was something that no one ever talks about, right? And so I think when he was talking about it, that also allowed more people to talk about it because the way the messaging was getting out because of social media, but also just going back to organizations. Because there is already a group there and with members and so on and so forth, they're able to talk about that more. And they're already building that into their own campaign work, right? And saying, listen, the campaign that we're already fighting is targeting this person, right? And we have an elected that is also saying this. Let's continue to go after them so we can get what we need.
Got it. I'm going to ask one last question to Alvaro, and then we're going to turn it over for audience questions. Alvaro, I kind of want to treat you as a one-person focus group here.
Okay.
You brought so many cases, you were involved with so many things. Things that resonate with me are the grocery stores, the Planet Fitness, but there's probably hundreds I've never heard of. Yeah. How did you know that something was going to pop with the public versus something that was a good fight to be picking behind the scenes, but really would never see the light of day?
So, honestly, we wouldn't know in many cases, but one sign, and I'm sure the Attorney General experiences this, is you will initiate an action and suddenly people from corners of your life you haven't talked to in a very long time will text you and say, you just banned non-competes. You have no idea what a big day this is for my family.
That's right.
People in my kids, preschool, who I, barely knew who I was, figured out a way to call me and say, you have no idea. I will be able to leave this job where I'm being treated like crap. And so that was one thing that provided a big response. And I want to echo something the Attorney General said, and that you said, Juanita, as well, which is one thing that is underappreciated from Chair Khan's leadership at the FTC is, in addition to being completely and utterly unafraid of billionaires and their companies, which cannot be underappreciated, is she opened the doors of the commission. Every single meeting started with regular small business owners, union leaders, regular consumers, patient advocates calling in and telling us about their lives. And she and I and Commissioner Slaughter would go out and do these roundtables, and this is how we learned to talk about our policies. And so I'll give you one quick example from right here in Louisiana. How many of you have had the unfortunate experience of learning about PBMs? Okay, a couple folks. All right, so these are these pharmacy middlemen that have been bought by insurers that systematically steer prescriptions away from independent pharmacies that are much more likely to serve low-income urban and rural communities to their chain pharmacies that are much more likely to serve suburban and well-to-do areas. Now that was a lot of words, right? How did it cohere for me? I sat down like over a 3-hour dinner with a bunch of Louisiana pharmacists who said, let me tell you something, the last hurricane that came through, there were 2 parishes who are normally served by 25 pharmacies. They were down to 4. It was 3 independents and the Walmart pharmacy. And people were coming into our pharmacy with insulin prescriptions, and the screen from the PBM said, do not fill. Take it down the street to the CVS, which was under 3 feet of water. Okay? And so that was when I understood how self-preferencing hurt people, how steering hurt people. Whereas if I give you this acronym soup of PBM, WAC, WAC, AWP, NADAC, which are actual real acronyms that people talk about, will never make sense. And so that's how we focus group our actions, and we learned how to talk about them, was those meetings.
And you guys came to Minnesota, and we talked.
Yes, sir. That's right.
We had some great conversations there. And it also, the other thing Alvaro's really hitting on is a lot of us urban progressives, who fits that category? I live in a city. We think about how do we connect with our neighbors in rural communities. And this should be on the mind of all of us. And independent pharmacies serve in rural communities. That's reality. That also FTC and Minnesota AG and Illinois AG sued John Deere. Some of us know John Deere because people wear John Deere hats. Well, let me tell you, if you have a combine, then you might not be able to have anybody fix it other than John Deere. If you have a car of any kind, which has all kind of computer stuff in it, you can take it anywhere you want to be fixed. If your combine breaks down and you can't get that crop out and you're sitting there a week unable to cultivate, you might lose your farm behind something like that. And people in rural communities are very angry about that. So if you're trying to find ways to create an urban-rural-suburban connection, these issues have a lot of potency.
Amen. All right, let's take some questions. I'm going to ask you to say it, and then we'll repeat it for the live stream. Apparently, passing the mic creates feedback and stuff like that. So let's just have a show of hands. We'll call on people.
Everybody shy.
Okay, I'm going to do 1. Let's get 2 more in the queue. Anybody else?
1, 2,
2.
3.
Where?
Right there.
There we go. All right, we got our first 3.
Amazing. Hi, panelists.
Hey.
Thank you for coming today to talk about how we take down billionaires. As we enter this era of oligarchs, how should we be engaging with folks across demographics, right? Those working class folks, middle class folks, people who before did not have a lot in common, who now have the same fight. How would you all suggest that we go about organizing those folks, connecting them, and connecting the dots between the way that they're being impacted by all of these changes in a way that creates a cohesive groundswell of people who are fighting for our collective humanity?
So the question was, as we fight oligarchs, how do we take that message to multiple communities in a cohesive way? Keith, you want to go first on that one?
Well, story, right? I mean, the thing is, type 1 diabetes does not discriminate some people might be insured, it might not hit them as hard, but there are people throughout, there's certainly a diverse racial group that is dealing with type 1 diabetes. Then the right to repair. I was talking about John Deere, big issue there. We had to pass a right to repair law in Minnesota, and the big ag people came in and said, well, except for the combines, so that's when the AG sued them, right? And so that issue, food prices. We had an incredible meeting at the AG's office in Minnesota on how the Robinson-Packman Act, which exists to try to make sure that food prices are good for everybody, is simply not being enforced, which explains why your groceries, bam, up there, and why the big boxes are able to outcompete the small retail. So just thinking of the stories and telling the stories, I would just say, and then one more thing, and I'll pass it. They're actively trying to divide us. It is so important to understand that. Our story's got to be one of solidarity. It's got to be one of human solidarity. It's got to be cross-racial. We have got to, particularly within the progressive movement, understand that as we lift the voices of historically excluded people, that means we don't have to demonize people who have historically been on the other end of the power equation. Oftentimes, it's not them screwing everybody, it's the Bezos, Zuckerberg, and Musk people who are doing it. And then I would just say one last thing, sorry. We've got to confront that there is, we all like to say the 99%. The truth is that many of us, and I say that in an inclusive way, who got college degrees and stuff like that, there is a diploma divide in our country, which does impact like 0 to 80, who is living in relative comfort compared to. Now you might be on the other side of the fence from the 1%, but we need to fight some of the classism within our own movement, which says, well, if you got an electrician certificate as opposed to a college degree in Chaucer, that somehow one's better than the other. And this is something that does exist within our movement. And I hope we confront that as well. That's another point of division.
Yeah, that's a great point. Before moving to the next question, Ryan, I think one way of paraphrasing that question about how do we get our message and our vibe to resonate across communities is to say, talk to me about the crosstabs. What do you see when it comes to
talk about crosstabs?
College, non-college, or just what observations when you look on the back end of polling do you see when it comes to trying to get a message across to multiple communities at the same time?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think the billionaires and the oligarchs right now, talking about that is, the good news there is that billionaires are unpopular across the board. Every demographic thinks billionaires are unpopular, views billionaires unpopular. So if you, no matter where you go, it's a very uniting message to say these people have too much power. When we ask people if billionaires have too much power, majority Republicans think that billionaires have too much power in the government. So you don't even need to fine tune your message when you go out there. That's why when Bernie Sanders is going out and doing the Fighting the Oligarchy tour, some of the biggest crowds that he's getting is in, very red states. And so I think that's the one good thing about talking about billionaires and oligarchs in this time. The other good thing is that, what Democrats need right now is something that, brings the Democratic base back as well as the swing voters, right? The reason why Democrats have historically low approval ratings right now is because a lot of Democrats in the party are very upset with the party. And a lot of that is because the Democratic Party voters don't think that their Democratic leadership is fighting for them. And so fighting billionaires, naming them, calling them the villains, links back to that, and it also links to their number one concern, which for 3 years has been the cost of living, and isn't going down, isn't changing at all. And so billionaires can be specific, also corporations that are ripping you off by price gouging and raising your costs on groceries that you can't afford food anymore. That's a universal struggle that worked in New York City, that would work in red states. And so I think, the beauty about talking about it like that is that it really is universal.
Got it. All right. I think question number 2 is in the back there. Go for it.
One of the things that's been most frustrating to me is seeing Democrats say and not what is useful to say. An easy example is, okay, the right's spending $1 million demonizing trans people, then we look at a poll and says, oh, a lot of people are suddenly concerned about fairness, and then we have Pete Buttigieg and Gavin Newsom reinforcing the rights narrative rather than thinking about how can we move people to the left. Or just saying, here's this wedge issue, that doesn't pull well if I talk about it, and so I'm just going to pretend that it'll go away if I don't acknowledge it, and then we just lose on the issue. So my question to y'all is, seeing the success of Mamdani, actually creating a vision for what we want our life to look like, actually painting a picture of humanizing the kinds of people that often get targeted by the right, how can we use both stories and polling not just to see what's safe, but to actually move voters in the direction towards the outcomes that we want?
Great. For the people watching at home, the question was basically about following polls versus leading polls. How can Democrats avoid just going with what is safe on paper? Juanita, does Zoran look at a poll and say, oh, the whole nation is talking about free busing, or was something else at play there?
Yeah, I don't think he did that. I mean, I honestly, I think it just goes back to what I was saying before, and what we've been talking about is it's a lot of the stories. And I think it's also the consistency of it, right? Because you just can't hear one thing and see it one time and say, oh, this is great, it's done, everyone is fine. You have to continue hearing the story, you have to continue seeing the changes, you have to continue seeing the wins. And I think like that's one of the things that we're not seeing right now as Democrats, right? We're not seeing continuous wins. And then when we do win, we don't talk about those wins, and we don't say how those wins have impacted us in a positive way, right? And we need to, and if we lose, right, being very clear about why we lost, and then saying, listen, we didn't have the tough conversations, and this is what we need to do now to get it right, and then making that commitment and doing that hard work to be able to move people forward. I think just going back to that question, I think it's the consistency of showing the wins and telling the stories and moving people around, because a lot of things that were brought up during Zoran's campaign, I mean, he won the primary, right? We need to see what happens in November. I am very hopeful that all will be well and he will be Mayor Zoran Mamdani, right? Yes. Sprinkle all the fun stuff, right? But once he's in, he's going to need a great administrative team, right? He's going to need all of us who were out there knocking on doors, making the phone calls, texting, giving money, being ready to have his back, right? To make sure that these policies happen, and say, hey, we need this to go harder, or what do you need from us, and really get into co-governance, because that's the piece we don't talk about as well, what the stories. It's like, yes, we want you to do these things, you're there, but now how do we actually work with you? If we now need to start calling out the billionaires to make sure your agenda passes, then that's what we need to do, but then you need to make sure you pass this agenda.
Can I just say, I love your question. I think it's one of the most important questions. Are we thermostats or are we thermometers, right? So let me just say, I'm gonna give y'all two stories. Here's a story for you. Transgender athletes are hurting fair competition in women's and girls' sports. That's a story. Here's another story. Sports teach good sports, being a good sport. They teach teamwork, they teach camaraderie, and all kids, including trans kids, should be able to participate in that. Two different stories. I like the second one better. Now, I fault us Democrats, well, I don't know about us Democrats, but I'm speaking for myself. I fault us as a Democrat for a lack of imagination. We just won't. I mean, it's like every time they say boo, you back down and start apologizing. Right. Couldn't you damn just stick up for us? I mean, there was a real smart woman who was a state legislator when I was in the state legislature in Minnesota who said, Keith, people don't always expect us to be successful, but they expect us to always be faithful. And so we're not being faithful. We say we're for civil rights. We say we're the Civil Rights Coalition. The second some right-wing jerk who's trying to divide us says boo about trans people, and we're oh, you're right, and want to change the subject. There should be a cost for this behavior. We should punish people for this. And I don't mean anything bad for anyone listening. I mean just withdraw support from that. those two politicians whose names were mentioned should feel that it is not a good idea to sell out your base. And we should say, if you want to redeem yourself, you need to come up with a story that is inclusive and doesn't feed into right-wing scapegoating of our friends and our neighbors and our family members, some of whom are trans. So this is the thing. Thanks for your question. I think all of us are going to leave here thinking about that.
Yeah. And I'd like to add one thing to that. So I think Keith did a great job of differentiating between playing offense and playing defense as we frame issues. I want to talk about the insider-outsider dynamic here, because I would argue that those who look at an on-paper poll and even see things that are popular actually do themselves a political disservice if they are repeating issues that Democrats have been talking about for 20, 30 years, right? I was talking to a candidate just last week who's trying to position themselves as an outsider insurgent, and I'm like, oh great, what do you stand for? I want to raise the minimum wage, I want to negotiate drug prices. It was, I said to them, I was like, I could picture Chuck Schumer saying all those things, right? If Bill Clinton literally campaigned on those things, they don't sound new, crashing the gates. They sound like insider creatures, right? So part of what was so shocking to me and amazing, or not shocking, but laudatory with Zoran was free busing and stuff like that just felt outsidery. It felt like there's a person with new ideas. What the FTC did, it should be as easy to cancel a subscription as it was to sign up. Oh, I like that, right? Like, I actually was having trouble canceling a gym membership until I forwarded them a Lena Khan video and I was able to cancel it. And it's like things that just like help our lives in a new, fresh way symbolize outsiderness. And one thing that our friend Rohit Chopra, who's on the FTC and then the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, talks about is that we can't be kind of knee-jerk reacting to what Trump is doing in a way that positions us to defend an old, broken, discredited status quo, right? And if Trump is talking about tariffs, the one thing you can give him is it is shaking up the system, right? We need our equal and opposite shake up the system, not just saying no and reverting to Clintonian policies. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Keith.
Can I answer that too, quick, on the poll? Because this is like I'll keep it quick, but this is like a kind of a data for progress ethos that we are wholly agree with you on. This is that public opinion is not static, and public opinion firms like us aren't just measuring public opinion, but we should be moving public opinion. I don't understand, it's like people don't believe in persuasion anymore. That's what we're supposed to be doing.
Right.
And so also the problem with all of this is that it assumes that public opinion is static, which it doesn't make any sense. We've seen public opinion move all the time. I think a good example of that is the Albrego Garcia fight. And when there were a lot of people out there saying, don't talk about this, right? This is Trump's #1 issue. Trump is plus 10 on immigration. If you bring this up and you say, okay, maybe he is, maybe the Trump administration is disappearing people in the street. But if you bring this up, this is going to raise the salience of immigration. It's going to help Donald Trump at the end of the day, and Democrats are going to get hurt. And thankfully, some Democrats said, absolutely not. They went to El Salvador. They got arrested. They fought for that. And now Trump has a -10 approval rating on immigration. Like, it made the press cover it in a different way. People dug in. And also, finally, just on this stuff, like that. Top lines of public opinion are very general. It very much depends on how you ask it and what your language is, right? So like when you do ask, like, is mass deportation, do people believe that mass deportation should be a thing that happens? People broadly say yes. But if you break that down and you say, okay, what types of people do you want to be deported? It's almost nobody, right? Like, we've tested this. We said, okay, how about this person on TPS status? How about this person that's been here for 5 years? How about this person with a family? Like 80+% of people say, absolutely not, I don't want that person deported. So it's like, if you look at it in this broad sense, not only are you assuming that it's static, but you're assuming that that's the only answer. So Democrats really need to wrestle with this, and I really appreciate the question.
Well put. All right, we had question number 3 that we already called on the back. Can you identify yourself? Sorry. There we go. Okay.
My name is Blaise Zara, and my question is, I completely agree with the idea of, like, stories are important, right? But our story isn't the only one out there. In fact, the right has unprecedented levels of media control at the moment, especially with, like, legacy media and stuff like that. And there is a large amount of people that are not just like kind of uneducated about like progressive policy in regards to unions, in regards to all of these social safety nets, but are like actively polarized against it and are like completely unwilling to even hear arguments on it. How do we really work in an environment where there are people out there that you can just talk to on the streets when you ask them about, hey, how do you feel about unions? Their immediate knee-jerk response is like, oh, you stop them. Like, how do we work in such an environment?
Thank you. So the question was basically, there's a whole equal and opposite or more greater set of stories being told against us. How do we engage voters or the public when all those stories are out there?
I'd love to jump in. So I obviously don't have a silver bullet. If I did, you know, I'd be very wealthy, which I'm not. But I will tell you this, that at the FTC I had a lot of experience looking at things not as a question of left or right, but I say it's not a question of left or right, it's a question about the money at the top crushing everyone underneath. And when you bring that thinking to any number of problems, I find that a lot of people start listening, even on issues that are super polarized, like immigration. And so the example I give is look, like we can confront immigration as a left versus right, you know, race and ethnicity question. And I'll go to that protest at the courthouse. Amen, absolutely, right? But the way I increasingly put it is in terms of class. So one of the last meetings I had as a commissioner was in Little Havana in Miami. And it was nighttime, it was early April, it was like 8 p.m., but it was already that like soupy 85 degrees out. And we sat down and we met with the guys who build the skyscrapers for the Jeff Bezos and hedge fund billionaires of the world. And they started coming in, and we thought we were going to have a conversation about misclassification and, oh, you know, these guys don't get overtime, they don't get unemployment insurance, they don't get workers' compensation. Their number one complaint is that they were dying of heat and that they did not have water on the job.
Safety,
yeah. And I think of that and I think, you think deporting those guys is going to make those, you know, billionaire developers start giving their employees water? You think they're going to suddenly start W-2ing their employees and paying them overtime and workers' compensation? No, they're going to find some other way to screw the next group of people who start working for them. And then here's the other thing I tell people about immigration. You know, picture immigration enforcement in LA right now, right? You have moms en route to pick up their daughters and kids from school, slammed up against the back of a pickup truck, literally begging, please let me go pick up my kid, please, please, please. There was a scene out of Massachusetts where some lady holding a baby bottle was slammed up, her face against the asphalt, right?
That's a story.
I spent 3 years doing law enforcement, civil law enforcement, which is frankly what most immigration enforcement is, right? These folks mostly have not committed crimes. Let me tell you what happens when we are investigating a billionaire company that may have broken the law. They get a letter on 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, right, PDF'd, to their general counsel saying, it's called an access letter. Please, we think there may have been a law violation. Will you please let us look at your documents? They don't answer, they tell us to go pound sand. They get an angry letter, right? Saying, now we demand that you give us this information under penalty of law. A Zoom call is scheduled for 3 days later at a time mutually convenient for the lawyers, right? Meetings are had via Zoom. Their lawyers come to Washington, D.C., they meet with our staff. Then they meet with our bureau director. Then they meet with every single commissioner for an hour before we sue them. Okay? This is how we treat billionaires who break the law, and this is how we treat a regular person who made a mistake. And that's wrong. And again, I haven't told you where those ladies are from, right? I haven't told you they're from El Salvador or from wherever else. I haven't used the word immigrant. I don't think, maybe I have, but that hasn't been the focus of what I'm telling you. I'm talking about regular working people getting screwed and the billionaires who are becoming, you know, God knows what the next thing is, trillionaires off of their backs. So that I've had a lot of purchases of. Please.
So I might not be getting your question right, but it sounds to me like what I'm hearing you ask is, when people are intransigent to what you're trying to share, what do you do then? And let me just tell you that if somebody says that unions are not popular, You tell them unions are more popular than any time since the 1960s, and it's 71% of the American public right now. You tell them people want their unions, and the best thing you can do for anybody is to get them some bargaining power. So part of how you deal with these folks is you be informed yourself. The other thing is, don't waste your time. One of the things we realize in door knocking, so I stand for election, I ask people to vote for me. That's what I do for a living part of the time. And if somebody keeps me on the door more than a few minutes and wants to argue, I leave because I know they're just trying to keep me from getting to other doors. So understand that, yes, there are some people out to get you. They don't want you to win, and they want to maintain the status quo, and they might waste your time doing it. Don't be sucked into it. And let me just tell you, there's an African proverb which says, when the warrior walks in the room, all backs straighten. What does that mean? Well, it means that having that fighter spirit, being upbeat, positive, and can-do, it's contagious. Also, being a downer is contagious. So it is important at a conference like this, Netroots Nation, which is the vanguard of the progressive movement in America, that we all walk out of here finding our own inspiration so that we don't let ourselves get deterred, because people who are counting on us need us to get up and go and keep fighting and be persistent and never quit.
Well put. Juanita, I just want to see if you have anything to add. He talked about unions being synonymous with Stalinism. I'm sure the democratic socialist thing is a big topic of conversation in New York. Is there anything just on the ground that you'd like to report on in answer to that question?
I mean, Keith said it, right? Like, don't spend time with people who just want to get into an argument with you, because that's just wasted energy. There are more people out there that are, like I said before, that are waiting to be asked and invited into the fight than the ones who are out there just trying to argue with you. There's more that want to do stuff than don't. Yep.
Excellent. Okay, so we have time for one last short question. Is there one? Okay, we got one in the front here.
I really like this session, and one thing I
Just for the cameras, he said he really likes this session.
Great start.
and your love for Zoran is so.
He said the moderating is particularly fantastic.
Zoran talks about a wide variety of topics, and some of them are difficult. For example, Gaza and Palestine.
Yes.
And Gaza and Palestine is not only about one thing, but it also talks about military spending and where the money is coming from and where that money can be used. But we pick and choose of what we like of Zoran and where we want to place it, but we completely cancel that. And that's something that has been affecting, I believe, as an immigrant, the Democratic Party, because we do not talk on all topics which we find difficult to talk to. We still want to make our neighbors happy rather than being more worldly in our vision of what people actually want. So just wanted to highlight that part, that we can choose what Zoran stands for.
Keith, do you want to summarize that question?
Well, I think the general point is that that not everybody wants to embrace the wide range of views that might represent progressive thought, and how do we deal with some of the more uncomfortable topics. And the questioner mentioned Gaza. One thing, I really love Zoran Mamdani's answer when he was asked that in the debate. Y'all remember what he said? Where are you going to go? Where's the first country you're going to go to when you get elected? And he goes, one person says, I'm going to the Holy Land. Another person says, I'm going to Israel for the 12th time. And he says, I'm going to go talk to New Yorkers. And that he just smashed that question into the, I understand that these issues can be complicated. Most Americans do want to stop to the genocide in Gaza. That is, and this is across religious faiths, by the way. And so I don't think it's the third rail that it might have been years ago. But I just think that, look, I think in politics, you got to keep the main thing the main thing. If you're the mayor, if you're running for the mayor of New York, maybe you should prioritize New York. Right. And this is a rule that kind of governs. But also, I don't think there's anything wrong with having some issue. You may not agree with Zoran Mamdani on. I mean, you have to agree with the main thrust of his service, which I believe is affordability and confronting the corporate abuse of the average New Yorker. So I don't know. Those are some of my thoughts. Thank you for your question.
Okay, so to wrap up, why don't we just take 30 seconds each, given everything that's been put on the table, what is the singular point that you hope people leave this room thinking today? Ryan, why don't we start with you and just go down the row?
I think the single point that I would focus on here, besides storytelling, is just that you need to get out there and fight also. You need to have a villain, and you need to tell people what it is and why it's important to them. I think the reason why the Democratic Party is so unpopular right now is because they haven't done that effectively. And so if you take anything away from storytelling or what you need to do, it's that the candidates in 2026 who will win will be the ones that make that fight feel real, and they'll be the ones that go out and they make the case and they get into the public and they make it clear that they're not defending the machine that got them here, but that they're fighting for people and they're focused on the things that they care about the most. And right now, that's affordability.
Go out there, have the tough conversations, listen to people's stories, have a collective story that's being told, and name the villain and win some good stuff.
I would say less left to right, more the money at the top, crushing the people underneath. And to your intervention, I would say it's not just what Zoran has said about Gaza, it's about what he says, right? He says, how on earth do we not have money for school lunches, right? But we have money for bombs to starve kids. Right? He goes back to that core message, and it is a moral issue. It is also this issue of how on earth do we have this money, and how can we be spending it in this way?
The way that we engage politics is as important as the content of what we say. And our method, our way of doing politics needs to be personal, present, listening, and then we use what we hear from the people to articulate the issues that are most of concern to them. If we adopted that as an ethic, we would be very successful, not only in politics, but in policy. And let me just tell y'all, Democrats are smart enough to know this. They do know this. Why are they not doing this then? It's not like we're all a bunch of geniuses and they're so stupid. They're smart people. It's because they're getting money they're drinking from the same trough as many of those Republicans, and they don't want to speak ill of the person they're asking a PAC check from. So one of the things we've got to do is we've got to say no corporate money. That's got to be something we demand and get behind candidates who are for that.
Thank you. And I will give a very moderator's answer to the question I posed. I mentioned from the gut. And if one were to read a transcript of this panel, I'm sure one would agree with many points. But sitting up here, looking at these amazing panelists, all of them had notes. They were thoughtful in what they were going to say. But when they looked at you and spoke into this mic, they spoke from the gut. They actually believe the things that they are fighting for. It's not just something that is being handed to them. So I really just want to thank you all for fighting on a gut level for the things we believe in. Let's have a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.